As I mentioned in my previous video, Real Audio Review sent me his 64Audio U12t. And my god, what a terrible IEM this is. The treble is literally some of the worst I have ever heard in an IEM. I think it is only surpassed in how bad it is by the Hit Is MD4 to my ears. I've never heard treble this harsh outside of that. It's frankly unbelievable how harsh this IEM is. I was not expecting it just based on the graphs. It's even more harsh than the graphs indicate, to my eyes at least. And people are going to be like, wow, harsh treble equals resolution because I am tone deaf and don't know what sound quality is, So, okay. I was given a song recommendation by Real Audio Reviews, and one thing I wanted to say about this is that the harshness is not as noticeable as on pop songs because there's less going on, but it's still clearly audible. Like when there are crashes and stuff, the transient is not smooth. You can clearly hear peaking or high Q ringing. That's the best way I can describe it. Let me just give some live impressions with music examples. We'll start off with probably my most revealing song, 10 to 1 by Real. Like, I do not perceive this as resolution, it's just harsh. God. And, oh my god. Okay, so let me show you the graphs real quick. So this is the stock response versus the variations. The bass actually sounds okay, but I'll get to that later. There's a peak at 2 kilohertz, followed by this weird dip. I'm not sure where exactly the treble harshness starts, but for the record in Tone Generator, I can clearly hear this 13 kilohertz peak. And versus diffuse field, which is a flathead-related transfer function that is independent of direction, and in layman terms, it just means a blank slate. It doesn't show as a peak, but you have to understand that this crater in the response shifts the focus to this 2 kilohertz. So it's weirdly shouty with a part of the response being missing. When there's a lot of stuff going on in a song, this dip is kind of masked, so you don't notice the vocals that are missing that much. But in songs which are kind of just vocals with not that much going on, this dip becomes more noticeable. And with songs that have a lot going on, it comes across as more shoutiness from the 2 kilohertz peak than anything. The bass is not what I would want, ideally, but it's not really something I could call a natural sounding. It is pretty neutral bass. So I don't really have that much complaints there. Maybe it is slightly muddy to my ears, but again, this is just more subjective stuff. The objective problems are in the upper mid-range and treble, where this earphone is just utterly ridiculous. Like, even this T3 Plus sounds better than the U12t. What are these, like $80? I don't get as good of a seal with the T3 Plus just because Tin Hi-Fi has some of the worst tips ever, and this fit is not good. But the mid-range and treble is significantly smoother on this IEM, even though there's a noticeable 12 kilohertz peak on some songs. I would definitely listen to the T3 Plus any day over the U12t. And the U12t is actually significantly better than the ER2SC. The ER2SC is completely devoid of any bass, treble, and it's just pure mid-range. And there's also really bad 13 to 14 kilohertz peaking on the ER2SE. This is a really terrible IEM, but with EQ, the ER2SE is actually quite good, since you don't actually need any high Q filters to make this good. I can't even imagine how difficult it would be to make the U12t good with EQ. It's basically impossible to EQ and IEM this rough measuring to a smooth response at your own eardrum. And comparing it to the variations, the bass is different, yes, but the mid-range and treble is leagues ahead on the variations. It's so much smoother. It's very difficult to listen to the U12t. How can an IEM actually be this harsh and people think it's so good? It just goes to show how dumb people are in this hobby. In no world is this a good IEM. It has a 66 out of 100 Harman predicted preference rating, and I believe it. It's really bad. And aside from the unbelievably harsh treble, it's not that bad. Like, if the treble was actually smooth, I could listen to this no problem, but it is caused by many things, even including the crater in the upper mid-range, which is emphasizing the treble more than it would be if this crater was not there. Literally, any day, I would take my iPhone 12 Pro speakers over the U12t. Treble is so smooth compared to the U12t. The vocals sound at the correct level. The only problem is that there is no bass, and what can you do about that? They don't have enough excursion to actually give proper bass, unfortunately, but It just goes to show how bad the U12t is in the treble, where I prefer the iPhone over the U12t. This is one of those IEMs which I would call unlistenable. I don't know if I would commit suicide over listening to this IEM, but it's really not that far off just because of the treble. It just sounds wrong in so many ways. U12t. Okay, so at this part of The Great Escape by Girls' Generation, the missing vocal peak is actually more audible than any other song I've tested, because the vocalists kind of just increase in pitch at once, so you can notice that it's dipped on the U12t. It's literally so fucking annoying because I can't pay attention to anything else when the treble is so excruciatingly painful. It's ridiculous on this IEM. If you can actually hear upper treble, you will understand that this is really not listenable, but a lot of people who hype up the U12t are older guys, so maybe if you're like over 50 with poor high frequency hearing loss, this is a good IEM for you. But who am I joking? Obviously that's not true. This IEM is just a joke. About soundstage and imaging, that's actually one thing I was curious about with this IEM, just to sort of definitively confirm that it doesn't exist in IEMs or something, but I really can't perceive any noticeable difference between this and my Tin Hi-Fi T3 Plus. I think soundstage perception to my ears with IEMs mostly has to do with the mud region and treble smoothness, and obviously that makes sense. I would not pay more than $10 for this earphone, because I could literally get a Tangsu Weiner for $15 that blows this shit out of the water. Also, I'm going to give a classical music example, so I don't know how to pronounce this, but you can see it on the screen. On every one of those crashes, the treble harshness is clearly audible. It's high Q ringing. It's terrible sounding. So harsh. And, personally, the bass impact is not as high as I want, but like I said, this is more subjective than anything. And one thing is that the Harman target is an average that includes females and listeners over 50 years old who generally prefer less bass, so it makes sense why I would prefer more bass than the Harman target, because I am a young male. Okay, so in the song example Love Spell by G-Friend, the weird shoutiness is audible because I'm assuming that the vocalists are mainly in the region where it's peaking, and this dip in the upper mid-range is just emphasizing that part. It's really annoying. Yeah, Variations doesn't have any of the problems that the U12t does. It's infinitely smoother. The mid-range actually sounds correct. Bass is more to my taste, but obviously, like I said, this is more subjective. The U12t is an objective failure when it comes to the mid-range and treble. It's one of the worst treble performances I've heard in a long time. I really do not take anyone seriously who thinks this IEM is so good. Critical has this as an S rank for tone in tech. What a joke. Thank you to Real Audio Reviews for giving me the opportunity to review the 64Audio U12t. Unfortunately, it does not live up to the hype. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time. I'm out. I'd like to give a shout out to Moonolos, Ninja Coma 3, Hunter, Vsauce 4, Linexternal, Wadeacre, Sinivri, Tripped, and Fofo. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. If anyone else wants to support, please be sure to join the Patreon or the YouTube membership, link down below.